Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from FantasyFootballScout.co.uk. My name is David and today we're going to be having a look at how my team got on in Game Week 1, how I'm planning on setting up for Game Week 2 and how some of the issues that are specific to my team might be able to help you with some of the ones connected with yours. Now don't forget we've got ourselves another Friday night deadline in this week coming up, but it is at a slightly different time to usual. If you're catching us from the UK, you will be used to 6:30 being the Friday night deadline time usually, but Nottingham Forest against Sheffield United is kicking off at 7:45 p.m. in the UK, which means that the deadline this week is 6:15. And if you're catching us from outside the UK, make sure you double check what that means for your time zone as well. So there's all sorts of things we've got to remember this week. Although thankfully it looks like the transfer market might be relatively quiet this week because lots of us are going to be rolling transfers. That's certainly what I'm going to be aiming to do, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. But let's start off by having a look at how my team got on in Game Week 1. And it's great because we can finally, after all this summer of some new backgrounds on the channel, use that little box just down here, right here, where it shows what my rank is after the most recent game week. And I wasn't sure if I was to give myself a green arrow or red arrow. Live FPL thinks I should have a green one, but as far as I'm concerned, I started Game Week 1 as joint first in the world with all of you, and so bearing in mind my OR is currently 464,286. That's a red arrow for me. That's my overall rank. But I'm not too displeased with that, to be honest, after the way that Game Week 1 went, because I scored 82 points from returns. I make it from, I think, 8 of my players. The only ones who blanked for me were Flecken, Gabriel, and Rashford. And there was a couple of late decisions on this, but there was a lot of things that I was fairly happy with for some time. It was, of course, a Salah draft, which does mean that there were some moments in Game Week 1 where I was a little bit disappointed. I actually had Salah and Chilwell, and so I had the space of about 5 minutes on Sunday afternoon, 2 goals ruled out for offside, which was a little bit annoying, but I suppose with 82 points, beggars can't be choosers. So, I shouldn't get too ahead of myself and moan about things. So, let's go through the team then and just go through some of the picks that I made in the end of the preseason, because some of them have been there for a while. I'll cover them, the most obvious ones first. So, Stupinan had been in for some time, I was very happy with him. Saka as well. I wasn't sure between him and Martinelli and Odegaard near the beginning, but as things wound on and how well Saka was playing in pre-season, I came round to him. Haaland's an obvious one, and Burmo as well. The Rashford Fernandes 50-50. I went with Rashford in the end. Salah has been in my team for about 3 weeks. Once I sold Trent and worked out how much money I could spread around and have a Salah draft that still was relatively cohesive, I was quite set on him as well. I had Mitoma as a placeholder for a 6.5 million Brighton attacker, but the way that João Pedro was playing in pre-season and his role in penalties had me relatively convinced he was the way to go, and so that's who I went with quite near the end, if I'm honest. And so some of my later changes towards the end also involved, well, I'd vacated my 6.5 million slot for a Brighton midfielder in the middle, and I felt a little bit naked without Watkins, but I felt that Diaby playing up front alongside him could potentially match him, and so far he's outperformed him after one game, so I'm quite happy with that. So 7 points for him. And so just for the benefit of the podcast listeners, just going through the team in full, it's 2 points for Flecken, 1 for Gabriel, 7 for Estupinan, 7 for Chilwell, 3 for Rashford, 10 for Saka, 7 for Mbeumo, 7 for Diaby, 5 for Salah, 26 for Haaland, because obviously I captained him, 7 for Pedro. Now, the drama involved in my team going into Game Week 1 was, of course, largely related to my defence. Some of you will know, I was actually quite interested in Wan-Bissaka in a lot of the pre-season because he'd started to play a few games and had been quite creative in them. But then he was quite poor as a substitute in a game where Dalot started it and scored as well. And then he wasn't as involved with the main team in their final pre-season friendly as I'd like him to be. And so I kind of felt that was a bit of a risk. And of course, lo and behold, he's gone and got 12 points in this 1-0 win over Wolves. But it does sound like United were a little bit lucky to actually keep a clean sheet there. So maybe I've made the best decision long term. I made that decision probably about 10 days ago to not risk it on Man United defence. And so I started to have some spaces opening up, and I had Stones and I had Gabriel when I woke up on Friday morning ahead of the Game Week 1 deadline. The Stones one, I was very, very interested in the City clean sheet. Obviously, like many of you, I felt he was the way to go, and I managed to catch the news that he wasn't starting on Friday night in time to make a very late switch to Chilwell, which feels a bit fortuitous because I kind of rushed that. Where I was less fortuitous was, of course, what happened with Gabriel and Arsenal. I was one of those people that didn't quite get the news in time to make a switch. And I feel quite annoyed with myself here because I spent basically all of pre-season without an Arsenal defender. There'd been a couple of times on a few of these videos where I'd kind of gone, well, I'm not all that convinced by their defensive output, especially towards the back end of last season, which is, the most recent and, in my opinion, reliable data to assess this defence. And of course, Nottingham Forest in the end actually recorded a higher XG in their defeat at Arsenal than Arsenal did. And so already I kind of feel like the universe is punishing me for going against my gut here. I in the end just went with Arsenal because I felt like I'd done enough elsewhere in the team to be a little bit different, and I just felt I could maybe be a little bit more template on Arsenal defence because it was heavily invested in. So I thought, go on then, why not? Everybody else is, so why not? And then of course, at 6:29 p.m. I was on a stream with Sonaldo, and I caught it just too late because I was too busy sorting out the stream. I clicked on the transfers to make the change, and the site crashed at 6:29 p.m. so I ran out of time. And then what happened was, of course, Gabriel came on and blocked 9 points from Anderson off the bench, which because the rest of the team did relatively well, I'm largely sort of taking that in the light of, it was actually kind of funny. Because it's game week 1, plenty of time to bounce back from these sorts of things. And, 8 points difference on game week 1 doesn't really make too much difference. As I said, currently 464,000, which, it's very, you can't really read very much into your game week 1 overall rank. But I like to think as long as you're in the top million in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 game weeks, then you're probably doing something right. So I can't complain too much. But the question is, of course, what am I going to do for game week 2? I'm probably not going to be making any transfers. Now, I always, if I can, roll my transfer in game week 2. Now, many people will be familiar with this idea already, but anyone who's not aware of what a mini wildcard is, that is in game week 3 when you have gone into game week 3, hopefully with 2 free transfers, which is what you end up with if you don't make a transfer in 1 week. Of course, it caps at a maximum of 2, so you can't save them up that much. You want to make loads of transfers in one go after saving them, play the Sky game. That's where you get to do that. But yeah, if you can take 2 free transfers into a game week, you can make obviously 2 changes for absolutely free, or for a -4 you can make 3 changes. That's the mini wildcard. 3 changes at this stage of the season can be quite useful. And so I don't necessarily know exactly which direction I'm going to go in, but I know, for example, that Chelsea have a fixture swing in game week 3, Spurs have a fixture swing in game week 3, Brighton have one in game week 4. So into a worse direction. Those first 2 clubs, their fixtures get better, Brighton's get worse, for example. So there's changes I know I'm going to have to probably make at some point, and I think it's just about making sure I'm set up to capitalise on that. And so I've got Gabriel. Am I going to sell him for game week 2? Well, probably not. Even if I hear that he is ruled out in the sense that Arteta goes, well, I'm not going to start him, for example. There's obviously been rumours of him perhaps leaving the club. And so, for example, if he does leave the club between now and game week 2, I probably still won't sell him either. And the reason why is because I was actually very happy with the bench that I built for game week 1. And the players that didn't come onto the pitch for me were Anderson, Cash, and Archer. And I'd kind of been looking to rotate my Arsenal defender anyway, because as I said, wasn't all that convinced on Arsenal's defence, and especially with the trip to Crystal Palace in game week 2. Crystal Palace have looked very good in front of goal basically ever since Roy Hodgson came back, and they did very well against Sheffield United, as they did pretty much everything but score. So I can't really see Crystal Palace not scoring against Arsenal at home, and that was the same even before game week 1. So my plan had been to rotate one of my defenders in. Now, one of my defenders is Anderson, and I don't think Crystal Palace keep a clean sheet against Arsenal either. So it's a bit of a risk because I've put in Matty Cash in place of Gabriel. Now, I say that as a risk, more so now than it was earlier in the pre-season when we hadn't just seen Aston Villa smashed 5-1 by Newcastle. I do think there's a couple of mitigating factors here in the sense that they, of course, lost Tyrone Mings relatively early in the game to the point that it left them having to cobble things together, perhaps. They weren't necessarily expecting to have to put Pau Torres on with so much time to start the game, and arguably had that injury happened 3 days before the game, and then they were able to prepare with the formation that they went with the personnel that they went with in that back four, probably wouldn't have left them so exposed. But the big thing was just how high a line Aston Villa played against Newcastle. I thought that was a very brave call. I mean, it's not necessarily an unsurprising one because it does tie into the way that Emery likes to play with Aston Villa. I sort of expect that conceding 5 goals in a game like that in the first game of the season when their defence has been so good under Emery, it was one of the highest performing defences in the last 12 game weeks of last season. With that in mind, it wouldn't be too surprised if Emery spends a lot of this week coaching on defence, for example, maybe dropping that line a little bit deeper. But even if they do keep a relatively high-ish line, it's Everton, who struggled to score against Fulham. Good goalkeeping performance from Leno, but we know that Martinez is capable of good goalkeeping performances as well. So on balance, benching Gabriel instead of selling him and then putting cash into my team to give myself the 2 free transfers to maximise my transfer moves in game week 3, I personally think is the best way to go. Now, the other place where I've made a bit of a switch is actually in goal. I've got Flecken away at Fulham, and I've got Turner at home against Sheffield United. And there's a couple of pieces of information on defences here that I found really fascinating. Now, I looked at these. This is actually how I set my team pretty much as the deadline passed. I was kind of feeling this way anyway. But what's really interesting about how the Game Week 1 fixtures went was that actually, Nottingham Forest didn't concede a single big chance against Arsenal, which I found very surprising. Now, Arsenal had a lot of possession control in that game, of course, and scored 2 goals. But the XG that they conceded in that game, Nottingham Forest, was just 0.51. So, 0.83, I should say. 0.51 was Crystal Palace. But Man City, Crystal Palace, Nottingham Forest were the 3 teams in Game Week 1 that had the fewest or the lowest XGC. And so, bearing in mind they're going against a Sheffield United team whose XG score in Game Week 1 was just 0.51, the second lowest in the division. I think there's a relatively strong case to be made for a Nottingham Forest clean sheet this week. Of course, it is only 1 round of data, so we can't necessarily read too much into it. But of course, Forest were better at home last season than they were away, much better actually. Of course, beat Arsenal 1-0 in their final home game of the season to stay up, for example. So we know they can keep clean sheets at home. And Sheffield United, famously at the moment, struggling for goals and really struggling for personnel. So I don't necessarily think that's a terrible decision to make, because I know there's other people out there with Turner on their bench, perhaps maybe combined with Pickford, who didn't keep a clean sheet against Fulham when you perhaps were maybe hoping that he would, and he's about to go up against Watkins, Diaby, and that Everton attack. So if you're looking at those 2 goalkeepers and thinking which one to go with, I'm going with Turner over Flecken at the moment. Now, Brentford, I did think they actually played very well against Spurs, and of course Fulham didn't exactly set the world on fire with their attacking potential against Everton. They had just 2 shots on target in that game, and of course just Everton's luck that one of those goes in the back of the net. So if you've got Brentford defenders, I don't necessarily think it's an awful decision to start them either, but I just think at the moment Turner edges it for me. Now, of course, you've probably been sat there looking at my team and thinking, there's a C next to a player that isn't wearing sky blue. When is he going to talk about it? Well, now is that moment. The other change that I've made to my team for now is captaining Mo Salah against Bournemouth. Now, a lot of people are going to have Haaland, and a lot of people are going to captain Haaland because against Newcastle, you'd expect him to still get something. But with the way they played against Aston Villa, I think that there's a possible case, well, not a possible case to be made, I think there's a definite case to be made here that Liverpool have the easier fixture because Newcastle are looking very, very good. And so there's one thing that was slightly concerning me, I think, about the Salah captaincy after the Chelsea game was just the manner in which he was substituted, because he looked very angry when he came off, and Klopp didn't seem very happy with the way that he was angry when he came off, and there was a very sort of cold moment between those two. And so it makes me a little bit nervous about a possible benching, but I don't want to set off a load of klaxons in your heads regarding that. I think at that stage, I'm starting to overthink things because I went into Game Week 1 with Salah because I felt there was an opportunity there. He'd done very, very well in pre-season. He was the top scoring FPL player from Game Week 30 until the end of the season, which is when Liverpool switched to this new system where Trent moves into midfield, and could have had a goal and an assist against Chelsea if he wasn't ruled out for offside. And so I felt that I was relatively happy with what I saw in that game. And the way that Bournemouth play, it's very high intensity play style. I think that they will probably make it harder for Liverpool than people perhaps expect. I think they will score as well because the way that they will play under their new manager, I think, is going to cause Liverpool a lot of problems in their defensive areas. But I do think what it's going to mean is a very expansive and open game. There's going to be a lot of pressing in high areas, and if Liverpool can beat the press, then they're going to be able to create some really dangerous transitions, I expect. And so I think that there's a recipe here that has all the ingredients for Salah to have a good captaincy in game week 2. And as I said, it's just an opportunity to take, to be honest, because I've got Haaland anyway. I sort of have this inkling that Salah's going to outscore him, and with a lot of other people not having Salah, I think I've got to go for it. It's only game week 2, so the damage that will be done if this backfires, I think, is easily recoupable over the next 3, 4, 5 game weeks. So if nothing else, I'm sat here just making sure I'm talking myself into actually following through with it, because it would be rather silly if I went with Salah game week 1, saw him do well against Chelsea, and then didn't captain him. If I didn't take the opportunity, I think I'm not playing my game properly. So that's the way that I'm approaching that particular captaincy. Now, before I round up, I just wanted to take you guys through a couple of bits from the Fantasy Football Scout members area that helped me make some of these decisions from one week to the next. And if you haven't sorted out yours already, the 30% off preseason prices has actually been extended. So make sure you get your membership sorted out before game week 2. And once you've got that in place, every game week when you're setting your bus team and you're making some decisions throughout the week, using some of these tables is really, really useful. So first things first, of course, is the season ticker, and that progresses, of course, through the campaign. So game week 1 is out of the way now, and so we're now looking at the next 6 as being game week 2 to 7, and we can see that Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City and Brentford are the 4 teams with the best fixtures. I feel relatively safe in the way that I'm invested there for now. I've got a Chelsea defender in Chilwell, got an Arsenal attacker in Saka, I've got Haaland, and with Brentford, I've got Mbermo and I've got Flecken as well. And of course, with Chelsea just topping the season ticker, I've got players in my midfield who can become Chelsea midfielders if I need them to, for example. And if I need to, could upgrade to a Chelsea striker if I downgrade someone in my midfield as well. So looking ahead to when I might want to do that, probably going to be game week 3 or game week 4 when that's going to come around. So it's worth keeping an eye on those. If you're thinking about your team this week and you're wondering, I haven't got any transfers to make, what can I think about? Well, just have a think about how you can switch to some of these other teams in a few weeks' time. Now, a couple of other tables I like to use are the defensive tables. I always like to see which teams have been conceding the most big chances. And at the moment, it's an embryonic table because there's some teams on here that, of course, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see on there, but I'm going to be keeping a track of these tables each week to see how they develop. At the moment, of course, it's showing that Aston Villa have conceded the most big chances. 9 they conceded against Newcastle. Already discussed the sort of mitigating factors there, I think. But Luton, 6 big chances conceded against Brighton. Liverpool conceded 5 against Chelsea. Fulham conceded 4 against Everton. Burnley conceded 3 against Man City. And Spurs conceded 3 against Brentford. And so that tells me a few decent things there. It shows me that Brentford against Spurs have had a relatively productive time of it. And so I'm relatively happy with being invested in their attack. With Liverpool conceding 5 big chances to Chelsea, that goes to show that the Chelsea attack probably is going to be worth looking at this year. And of course, Luton as well may end up in the rather whipping boy category. Now, a couple of other tables I like to look at is my Captain Sensible table, which is in the public stats tables department of the Fantasy Football Scout members area, and you can have a look at it if you like. And what I do is I just sort basically every asset in the Premier League by their creativity and their goal threat. And so far, the players that have the highest creativity so far, Eze, 7 key passes in his first game. As we said, he did pretty much everything but get attacking returns against Sheffield United. So if you've been thinking about him, he started the season strong. Stupinan, Gross, and Maddison and Julian Alvarez are the 4 players tied for second place for key passes so far. So I'll be keeping an eye on some of those guys. Mentioned, of course, Spurs have some nice fixtures swinging around in game week 3, and Maddison is already looking very creative. In terms of some goal threat, who's had the most shots inside the box so far? Well, again, it's some Crystal Palace players. Odsonne Edouard and Eze are the 2 players top for shots in the box so far. And there's about 8 or 9 players tied on 4 shots in the box. So very persistent shooters. Jackson is one I've got my eye on. Very much sort of corroborating that with the season ticker, for example. And yeah, he's probably the one that I've got my eye on the most in terms of persistent shooting. But in terms of accurate shooting, one person that definitely stands out is Callum Wilson, who only playing 28 minutes against Aston Villa, 4 shots on target. That's more than any other player in the Premier League so far. And Newcastle's fixtures take a little while to get really tasty. It's around game week 4, 5, 6 that we're going to start wanting to be investing in them, and they're top of the season ticker for attacking potential between game weeks 4 and 10. And so knowing that Wilson Wilson can still put these numbers up despite not even starting is very encouraging at the start of the season. And interesting actually that Odsonne Edouard also relatively accurate compared to the rest of the Premier League, whilst also having lots of shots in the box as well. So I'm going to have my eye on him. 5.5, bearing in mind I've got Pedro. I don't really fancy Brighton's fixtures long term. Edouard, after game week 1, it's going to go on my watch list. I'm going to keep an eye, and we'll just see whether or not he can hold down a place at the top end of this table. Well, with that, I will leave you fine, folks, to the rest of your tinkering for the rest of game week 2, and we will see you next time.